Hello, I hope you're well. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to today's video, which is something new on this channel. You'll have to let me know your thoughts, but one of my reading goals and channel goals was to do some single book videos, just focus on one book and really dive into it. And so I couldn't pass this opportunity up to talk about one of my favorite books of all time, Passing by Nella Larsen. I read it for the first time in 2020. I will be completely transparent. This was a book that I initially picked up because right after George Floyd and in the midst of Black Lives Matter and all of these sort of anti-racist book lists that appeared, this book kept coming up, and I had taken stock of my bookshelves and was just like, I needed to do better. And so that's something that I've been working on for basically the last 2 years, to really diversify my reading and explore other experiences. But this book came to mean so much to me. But this is a story written by the Harlem Renaissance author Nella Larsen. She only wrote 2 books, Quicksand and Passing, and I think she had some short stories, but she was the first Black woman to earn the Guggenheim Fellowship. But Passing, which is also a Netflix movie at this point, is the story of these 2 Black women who have the ability to pass as white, hence the title Passing, and that's me. This book really just helped me to understand my own identity in a way that I hadn't really up until the point. I myself had never heard of describing oneself as white passing in any sort of way, but it made perfect sense to me because to the outside world, based on just looking at me, most people assume that I am white. And half my family is European, so that is accurate. But the other half is not. They are from the West Indies, most specifically Jamaica, and a lot of the sort of cultural connections, the way I was raised, was based on my family's Jamaican heritage. But that's enough about me. Really. This book just really opened my eyes and made me see my own experience reflected back at me in a way that helped me to digest a little bit of myself that I hadn't really come to grips with. So, as I mentioned, this is a book about 2 white passing Black women, Claire and Irene. They'd grown up together, but life kind of took them on different paths, and at the beginning of the book, they end up bumping into each other, and that triggers, much to Irene's chagrin, this sort of continued friendship, relationship, adversarial sort of thing between them, because they're leading very different lives. So Irene lives in Harlem with her husband, who she describes as not being able to pass, and their 2 sons. She's highly involved in the sort of Harlem Renaissance scene of the 1920s, where everything that she's involved in is really about bettering the lives of Black people and feeling empowered and celebrating the Black culture, and she's very involved there. Claire, however, has decided to pass for white, and she has married a white man who does not know that she is Black, and not only does he not know this about her, but he is also a very loud, braggadocious racist. So you have these 2 women who can pass like me, who have led these very different lives, now coming into contact with each other and now interacting quite frequently because Claire kind of pushes herself in and inserts herself. This is a book that talks and deals with race. Quite frankly, I would like to say, just because of these two characters and the way that they see race and also view themselves. And it's just fascinating to see the relationship of these two women, because there is something about Claire that Irene finds repulsive, repugnant. There's that she despises, but at the same time, she is like entranced by it, and like there are these lines within the book that seem almost erotic and lustful in the way that she looks at Claire and perceives Claire's being. But it also addresses so many interesting things about the culture and society of the time in the 1920s that I feel like we don't talk about now. Like, I never really heard much about passing, with the exception of The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett, which I read right after reading this book for the first time, only to discover that Brit Bennett had been inspired by, perhaps, or had found connections with passing and what she wrote in The Vanishing Half. And there's also a movie, The Imitation of Life, that deals with a similar issue. It's a black and white movie, I think it's from the 50s, but also deals with similar topics. I mean, bear in mind that this is not a historical book, although it is written during the 1920s, which to us is now a historical time period. It was written for people living at that time, so it doesn't really do any of that world building, which means that you kind of have to know or understand what was going on at the time. So, for example, this is before separate but equal was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So in like one of the first scenes, Irene is sitting in a hotel restaurant and is kind of concerned that if someone sees who she really is, she might get booted out. She thinks they'll do so gently, politely, because that's the sort of establishment it is, but it would still be embarrassing for her. So you don't get a lot of that. And the Harlem Renaissance, which I do think the Harlem Renaissance is prominent here, because the footnotes help, at least in my edition of the book, to explain how certain characters were based off of actual figures within the Harlem Renaissance and how things worked during that time period with the different parties and events and all of that sort of thing. But it is just really, really impressive the way that race is handled, the way that even the words that are used to describe like Irene and Claire's complexion vary differently. When you talk about Claire, like her skin is described as lily white in one situation. I think alabaster or ivory come up, but when you talk about Irene, it's like golden and olive and that sort of thing. But both of these women are white passing. And there's this phenomenal conversation about how successfully one can pass and the reasons why someone would choose to pass, which in Claire's case has to do with the life she wants for herself. She has some real ambitions, and passing for white means that you can gain certain things. And other characters only pass occasionally, in which case it's to get them like tickets to a Broadway show or to sit in a restaurant or something like that. Not everyone goes as in as Claire does. And then there's still others who can pass and have been very open with who they are as Black men and women. So there's all of this like complex sort of conversations and discussions about the benefits of doing this in the 1920s. But you also have to realize the risk that these individuals are taking, as I mentioned, like, Irene is worried about being kicked out if she's found out, but in Claire's case, she's married to a racist, has a child with a racist, and she, like, has to deal with that. What might happen if he finds out who she truly is? And on top of those discussions about passing, it also really addresses race and racism in kind of making you aware, perhaps, of the privilege that someone like Irene might have over her own husband or her 2 children, because she can pass and she has never been called the N-word, and she doesn't have to worry about certain things that her husband feels he needs to educate his sons on so that they're prepared when they're out in the real world and have to face these issues and this racism and this hate that some people might have for them based on their own skin coloring. So it's really, really intense and thought-provoking. But yes, the way that this book looks at race, the way that it makes you think, feels very unique to this particular book, and it also feels really quite accessible. As I mentioned, or did I mention, it is a short book. It's really more of a novella. It's like the edition I had, 120 pages long, so it is something that you could sit down and read in one sitting. I have in fact done that and thought it was a wonderful way to read it. But the language, because it is written in the 20th century, is also quite accessible in that way. But yeah, this is a book that is really important to me, and so I definitely recommend that you pick it up. I will say, without giving any spoilers, that the ending is quite an ending. So if you have read this book, come at me, because I want to talk about this with more people. This ending it's something special. But yeah, that's really what I wanted to say about this book. As I've said probably a million times in this video, hopefully I will have edited some of the million out, it is a favorite book of mine, and it's definitely a book that I want to continue visiting, and it definitely makes me want to pick up Quicksand, which is Nella Larsen's other novel. So yeah. Anyway, I hope that this video was interesting to you. I hope that I've maybe encouraged some of you to grab a copy of this book and give it a read. If I have managed to do that, let me know in the comment section. But also, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe, because that means the world to me, and it also helps this little channel grow. And I will see you next time. Bye!